I'm speaking about the Magna Carta, the foundation stone of cultural democracy. Coming here takes me back to 1989, not to Berlin, but to Washington, where I was chairing a panel at the International Political Science Association meeting that year. As I was taking the podium, preparing, my speakers aligned across the panel. A young man introduced himself to me, his hands shaking, with a paper in his hands, and he wanted time on the program. I said, "This is impossible. The program has been determined 3 months ago." And he said, "Well, I have this paper. It's the results of a survey, statistics, of Politburo members, of generals, admirals, the very elite of the Soviet Union. And I wanted to share it." And I said, "Well, why didn't you put in and apply to take part in this panel?" He said, "I couldn't get this paper out of the country without taking it personally." I said, "Give it to me. I will scan it during the talk of the first speaker and see if I can squeeze the panel a bit." That paper showed that only 18% of the elites of the Soviet Union were satisfied with the government they had in place. It was effectively, in early 1989, the forecast of the falling of the Berlin Wall. Growing up in America, I had a pretty thorough schooling in English history, English literature, not least English cinema, which began with the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, then 1066, and then 1215, when the great charter of the barons, later Magna Carta, was won at Runnymede. All American colonists knew then that George Washington, John Adams, John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, and nearly all the founding fathers were Englishmen. Alexander Hamilton was a Scot. As President Obama observed in his speech in Parliament in 2011, our system of justice, customs, and values stemmed from our British forefathers. So they came. And there were settlers then from Germany, France, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Swedes and Swiss, Russians, Chinese, and all the other countries' settlers, refugees and other immigrants who came to the melting pot of America over the past 400 years. My parents took me to the New York World's Fair in 1940, just 7 years old, to see many of the country's exhibitions, and I remember particularly, even from that age, seeing a Danish smorgasbord, vivid in my memory today. And among many others that I recall, the British exhibition, which was the first time I saw Magna Carta, the 1215 Lincoln Cathedral copy. On my first visit to Britain, my very first morning in that country, I was a serving officer in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, returning to America to be discharged after serving in Korea, my tour of duty completed. On my first day in London, I went to the British Museum to see two things, the Magna Carta and the Rosetta Stone, which to me represented the two icons of a civilized society, the rule of law and communication outside the village, or in the history of this city, communication between East and West. Would the wall have fallen without television? The East Germans witness to American, English, British, German, all the television that they were able to see. I became a trustee of the Magna Carta Trust 21 years ago, when I became chairman of the Pilgrim Society. The chairman of the trust, by charter, is the master of the rolls, the head of civil law in the UK, and I now serve as deputy chairman of the trust. As the longest-serving member of the trust, I was asked to chair the Magna Carta 800th anniversary commemoration. How could I refuse? So that's why I'm here and why now? It's also largely the reason for the existence of the special relationship that bonds my two countries, my birth country in America and my adopted country in Great Britain. Obama said in that speech, "Our relationship is special because of the values and beliefs that have united our peoples throughout the ages." Centuries ago, when kings, emperors, and warlords reigned over much of the world, it was the English who first spelled out the rights and liberties of man in Magna Carta. Many of your countries had a similar defining moment. The first to follow, I believe, was proclaimed in 1222, 7 years later, the Hungarian Golden Bull. So why are you here? What's this conference all about? You believe in the rule of law. You believe in democracy. You believe in human rights, the freedom of religion, in due process, in trial by jury, in peace, not war, rather than the way that kings, emperors, and warlords use of force, but rather in cultural diplomacy, soft power. There are many myths which surround Magna Carta that was only a fight between the barons and the king. It was a failed peace treaty. It certainly was. There's nothing wrong with that, except that it failed just 9 weeks later when annulled by Pope Innocent II. But it was not only that. It was the beginning of the spread of modern democracy. Magna Carta overturned for the first time divine rule, King John and somewhat later King George III's power over the American colonists, the beginning of representative democracy. As the aptly named Lord Judge, the former Lord Chief Justice of the United States, said recently, "Lulum scutagium, vel exilium pontitur in regno nostra, nisi per commune, concilium regni nostri," which very roughly translated into American means no taxation without representation. And it was the foundation of human rights under threat now, at home and abroad, as we consider how to cope with the threats which face us in the 21st century. Magna Carta matters still today. It is the foundation stone supporting the freedoms enjoyed today by hundreds of millions of people in more than 100 countries, most represented here at this conference. So besides being a peace treaty, what else featured in Magna Carta? It enshrined the rule of law. It limited the power of authoritarian rule. It paved the way for trial by jury, modified through the ages as the franchise was extended. It did define the limits of taxation. No taxation without representation was the cry of the American colonists in the War of Independence, petitioning the king for their long-cherished rights as free Englishmen guaranteed in the Virginia Charter of 1606 by James I, which led to the United States of America. For centuries, it's influenced constitutional thinking worldwide, and does today in many Commonwealth countries, even in France, Germany, and Japan, and throughout Asia, Latin America, and now Africa. Over the past 800 years, the denials of Magna Carta's basic principles have led to a loss of liberties, of human rights, and genocide taking place yesterday, this morning, today, and sadly, tomorrow. It's an exceptional document on which all democratic society has been constructed, described by the former German ambassador to the UK to me as the foundation of democracy. Just this week, I've been in Washington at the Library of Congress for the opening with Princess Anne present of their Magna Carta exhibition. Now, as well as having the Queen present at Runnymede on the actual date of the 800th anniversary, 15th of June next year, we're planning to have a Supreme Court organized mock trial with Lord Neuberger, President of the UK's Supreme Court, the Lord Chief Justice of New Zealand, and American Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer as the tribunal before which advocates from 6 different Commonwealth countries will be judging the barons and the bishops in the dock on the charge of treason, telecast and broadcast by the BBC. This will be on the 31st of July, the night before the Supreme Court exhibition opens for that year. The British Library, starting this November, will have the biggest exhibition it's ever held. There will be many other exhibitions and demonstrations, pageants and concerts, sound and light shows, seminars, symposia, open lectures and plays in the Magna Carta towns and cathedrals and castles, town halls, and town squares throughout the land here, in Canada, in the USA, in France and Germany and Poland and Trinidad and throughout the Eastern Caribbean. I spoke to 11 Caribbean countries by open access through the University of the University of the West Indies, UWI, just 3 weeks ago. Everywhere that values the principles the barons wrenched from the king at Runnymede. They had to fight for it then, and we are the beneficiaries and in a way are continuing that fight. I hope that delegates leaving this conference will take on board what I've said and in the coming year help me to raise the profile of Magna Carta and the principles of Magna Carta in your countries and conferences. You can follow the commemoration of the 800th by signing up to the Magna Carta newsletter at our website and tell us how you might and your organizations might get along to support the Magna Carta and the recollection and use it as a tool in your countries to proclaim the rights of all men and women in the world. I hope some of you will be with us next year on the 800th anniversary of this agreement at Runnymede and visit the Library of Congress now through the end of January. The British Library exhibition from February through September. The exhibition at the Supreme Court in London on August and September next year. And as some as well in Westminster Hall for the mock trial at the end of July, or at least watching it on BBC World and even BBC America. Now, one more point, if I may speak to the chairman this morning, and that is about this narrow science of statisticians, or statistics. I'm a fellow of the Royal Statistical Society. My message has to do with cultural diplomacy. We do have a broad discipline. It's used by nearly every speaker today. Thank you.